Okay, cool. So we are halfway through the year already, Jesus Christ. And as it is the midway point, I thought I'd go through my favorite albums and projects that have dropped in the first half of 2022. This isn't an exhaustive list of all the projects I've enjoyed so far this year because there have been a lot, but these are just my personal highlights. I haven't ranked these, it's just in alphabetical order, so it isn't, number one, number four, number five, or anything like that. And before I start, if my voice sounds fucked, I do apologize, but I've just come back from festival over the weekend in which I saw some of my favorite artists. I saw Tyler the Creator, I saw Baby Keem, I saw Charli XCX, I saw Playboy fucking Carti, and it changed my life. So yeah, my voice is very, very strained, but anyway. First on this list is Black Country's second album and their last with Isaac Wood, Ants From Up There. Now, at the start of this year, I hadn't heard for the first time. It had been on my list to listen to for a long time. And I met someone at the Brockhampton show who really, really suggested that I go back and listen to that album. I did. I fell in love with it. Went to listen to Ants From Up There, and some of these songs fucking broke me. In its structure, I find it probably a lot more accessible than for the first time. But the arrangements, the jazz-inspired chamber pop orchestra stuff, and the improvisation on the album as well is amazing to me. Isaac Wood manages to perfectly weave together pop culture and mythology and just pure heartbreak, sometimes all in the very same lyric. Songs like Bread Song and Holden, The Place Where He Inserted the Blade, Goodwill Hunting, all of these are some of my favorites of the year. Unfortunately, this is the last Black Country New World album to feature Isaac Wood. He left the band just prior to its release, and I think that kind of feeds into how bittersweet this album sounds as well, because without that information it sounds like a breakup album, but now with that information it takes on this whole new kind of spiritual, metaphysical meaning. Everyone in Black Country New Road is just at the top of their fucking game on this album. I haven't been able to get She Had Billie Eilish Style Moving to Berlin for a little while out of my head since the first day I heard it. But yeah, I am super, super grateful that this album exists. Next album is, well, it's not an album, it's a mixtape actually from FK Twigs. That's Capri Songs. Capri Songs is, in my opinion, wildly different from anything that she's released before. And just for the pure fact that I don't think she's ever been so eclectic on a project. There's inspiration from dancehall music, from hip hop, from R&B, from pop music, from electronic music, from dance music. It's a very wide spectrum. And I think maybe the reason that it's been marketed as a mixtape is because it allowed Twigs the freedom to not be bogged down in a, watertight concept that her projects usually have. Love the vocal performances, love a lot of the features as well. People like The Weeknd, Unknown T, Shy Girl particularly is probably my standout feature. And Oh My Love is one of my favourite songs of the year. Next up is one of my faves, Crash by Charli XCX. One of my most anticipated albums of 2022, purely for the fact that I think her 3 or 4 project run prior to that is one of my favorites in pop music ever. Number One Angel, Pop 2, Charlie, How I'm Feeling Now, that 4 run to me is insane. And of course, they all kind of got more progressively experimental as time went on. And it kind of makes people forget that there was a time where Charlie was marketed as this, next big pop girl, dropping tunes like Boom Clap and I Don't Care, I Love It. And Crash sees her career kind of come full circle where she takes all the things she's learned and experienced, changing her style and image and sound over the last 5 or 6 years, and merging that experience with a much more radio-friendly commercial sound. And as much as it is accessible, it's still super personal. Move Me, Lightning, Twice, Yuck particularly, one of my favourite songs of the year, maybe my favourite song of the year. Amazing pop album. Speaking of pop albums, another one, well, I'm calling it a pop album. I know some fucking Billboard things call it R&B. I don't understand why they keep calling it R&B. It's clearly pop. Dawn FM by The Weeknd. Similarly to Crash by Charli XCX, it draws a lot of inspiration from 1980s music, which is something The Weeknd has been doing since Starboy, really. But it's never been this apparent and upfront and center as on Dawn FM. I think his songwriting is the strongest it's maybe ever been. His hooks are still on point, his vocal performances as well. And a bit like Twigs as well, he was allowed the freedom to experiment with his vocal delivery. I also just love the fact that even though The Weeknd is, arguably one of the biggest pop stars in the world for the last at least 5, 6, 7 years now, he still is hell-bent on just being super conceptual with his music and with his albums, and I love that. Next album I want to talk about is one that dropped extremely recently, and that's Drill Music in Zion by Lupe Fiasco. I am not the biggest Lupe Fiasco fan in the world. I've only heard maybe half of his discography, if that, and everything I have heard I've relatively enjoyed, but I've never found myself dying to go back to it. And this is the first of his albums where I felt that feeling immediately. As I was expecting, it's lyrically dense and heavy. He covers some important topics as well. But what this album feels like to me, like I mentioned in my reaction, is Lupe Fiasco's take on the idea of violence in the 21st century in every form that it can take. And apparently Lupe recorded this whole thing in his living room in the space of 3 days with a $100 microphone, which is fucking insane to me because, most rappers can spend 5 years working on something and not produce something like this. Next album, extremely different from Lupe Fiasco. This is the debut album from Young Kayo, DTFK. Young Kayo is an artist signed to YSL, Young Thug's record label. And in my opinion, I think he is the most exciting thing on that label aside from Young Thug himself. I think Young Kayo and this album is one of the examples of what I like to call post-Carti music, or specifically post-Whole Lotta Red music, where they take just these heavy, heavy fucking beats and manipulate their voice into all these strange pockets and corners. A bit like what Young Thug does, but with a noticeably more darker edge. Specifically, Everything New and Yeet featuring Yeet. Yeet featuring Yeet, two of my favorite hip-hop songs of the year. If you could even call it hip-hop at this point, but whatever it is, I fucking love it. Next up is technically a debut album, but in my head, this is just Radiohead's 10th album. A Light for Attracting Attention by The Smile. As most Radiohead fans will be aware of by now, The Smile is a new band consisting of Tom York and Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead and Richard Skinner from Sons of Kemet. The Smile have consistently been dropping singles since the start of the year with the likes of The Smoke, You Will Never Work in Television Again, and Free in the Knowledge. In classic Radiohead fashion, some of these songs do make you want to sit in a corner and just cry yourself to sleep, particularly Open the Floodgates and Skirting on the Surface, which is just accepting that your life is a blip and completely meaningless. Classic Tom York, thank you. But, the instrumental palette for this, I feel kind of, I don't want to compare it to another Radiohead album because that's kind of, very easy to do. But in terms of the sound, I would say it's like an amalgamation of A Moon-Shaped Pool and some of the sounds from In Rainbows. Tom York's voice is as amazing as ever. I don't know how he keeps doing it, to be honest with you. If you are a Radiohead fan and you've been waiting for their 10th album for the last 6 years like me, this is the closest thing you're going to get to it. Next up is one of the most consistent rappers in the game, Denzel Curry, Melt My Eyes, See Your Future. Denzel Curry has been on a ridiculous hot streak since fucking N64, to be honest with you. But in terms of his studio albums, we've had Imperial, then we had Taboo, then we had Zoo, we had Unlocked, and now we've got Met My Eyes, See Your Future. This is probably Denzel's mellowest effort to date. There isn't, the super high energy rage kind of tracks that you usually associate with Denzel, barring a couple of exceptions like Zatoichi or Sanjuro. But what Denzel does different here is he takes a more meditative approach to his music and to his beat selection. It's a super reflective and introspective album, which, you could kind of gather from the lead single Walk In, which is one of the best hip-hop songs of the year. In my opinion, one of Denzel Curry's best ever songs as well. He touches on a lot of subjects like his own mental health, him growing past his struggles and things like that. And what I sometimes forget about this album is that there are quite a few features, but Denzel Curry, even on a track where, you know, there's another artist on there, he is always front and center. And I think, in my opinion, my only criticism of this album would be is that some of the features aren't needed because Denzel Curry just steals the show from his features, to be honest. Denzel Curry, super consistent. He's at a point in his career where we expect an amazing project from him at every point. Next one up, I know I said that Crash was one of my most anticipated albums of the year, which is true, but this, you know, by far my most anticipated album of the year. A lot of people's most anticipated album of the year from my favorite artist of all time. I don't care. Kendrick Lamar, Mr. Morale, and the Big Steppers. Now, I know I have a certain level of bias towards Kendrick, but I don't care. You know what happens when Kendrick drops. The day he drops, people are tearing apart his lyrics, you know, syllable by syllable, effectively. I tried to sit with this album for as long as possible before I even said anything. That's why I waited, 3 weeks or a month before I made the follow-up video to my reaction. And I've been listening to it fairly regularly since that video as well. It's hard to sum up this album in just, you know, a few sentences because it's so dense and eclectic. But, you know, to me, this is, like I said in my last video, an alternative title to this album could be Kendrick Lamar Goes to Therapy. It's Kendrick Lamar dealing with his trauma, the trauma that he is a victim of, but also that he is inflicted on his loved ones, whether that be intentionally or not. And that's a hard thing to do. You know, it's one thing for a rapper to address all the terrible things that they've gone through. That's hard enough on its own. But, you know, to take responsibility for the shitty things that you've done, you know, like Kendrick confessing to infidelity and his learned homophobia and transphobia as a child is a really big thing to do, especially for arguably, you know, the most widely acclaimed rapper of this generation. I love this album. Of course I love this album. It's Kendrick Lamar. So many fucking standout songs. Almost every song is a standout to me. You know, Silent Hill, Auntie Diaries, N95, Die Hard, Worldwide. I'm just going to list the whole fucking track list. Yeah, it's Kendrick Lamar. I fucking love it. I fucking love you, Kendrick Lamar. It's one of my favorite albums of the year. Speaking of trauma, speaking of rappers from California, speaking about trauma, next one, Vince Staples, Ramona Park Broke My Heart. With Ramona Park Broke My Heart, a bit like Mr. Morale, where Vince very openly addresses the fucked up things he's gone through as a child and as a teenager and as a young adult. What Vince Staples does on this album is it's so cold. Like, his delivery is so cold, but that's not because there isn't heart and passion poured into these songs, because there definitely is. It's like, I feel like that's part of the concept. Like, that's what this world has forced him to become. Songs like Rose Street, where he says, I don't go on dates unless I bring what keeps with me safe, where all of these things that happened to him have caused him to be constantly on edge, constantly paranoid, and at the end of the day, he can't properly reciprocate the love that other people have for him. And that's why I feel like this is such a tragic album. Like, Vince Staples, to me, makes tragic music. Again, some of my favorite songs of the year on here: DJ Quick, Rose Street, as I mentioned, particularly When Sparks Fly, When Sparks Fly is, I think, maybe the best ever Vince Staples song. I don't know how you can make the best love song of the year about your gun. Vince Staples did it, and it's fucking amazing. Speaking of guns and speaking of violence, I'm not sure how many people would have heard of this album. It's from a UK drill artist by the name of Sus, or Suspect, or Suspect AGB, or whatever you want to call him. Suspicious Activity. This album dropped quite early on in the year, actually, but I didn't get around to listening to it until about a month ago. One of my close friends who's really into drill music suggested this album to me back at the start of the year, and I put it off for a bit because I was really into a different drill album, but I was like, okay, fine, let me finally get around to it, and this fucking thing blew me away. It's extremely violent. It's extremely violent. It's cold. All the worst parts of drill lyrics and music you could imagine, all those stereotypes are present on this album. I love it. I don't know how much of it is fictional, how much of it is true. I believe that this artist is in prison at the moment fighting a case, so I don't know what's going on. But yeah, in terms of like just purely musically, because again, I'm just here for the music. The way this guy strings words together, like his rhyme schemes and rhyme patterns are fucking insane. I just want to pull up an example from one of the bigger hits from the album, which is called Caught in the Rain. He says at one point, sundown, jump in a ride, jump out, guns out, freeze up, gonna get gunned down, just watch how the bulldog bark and the teeth go and bite man's head, AG blonde hound, if you want woof, bark back, dog down, just watch how my shank plunge in, plunge out, trying to shut lungs down, leave a man rubbed out. Like, that rhyme pattern and rhyme scheme to me is fucking insane, and it's the fact that it fits this, I don't want to call it, I guess, concept. It fits this concept perfectly well. Beat selection is crazy, but it's savage. You know, if you're not into violent, if you don't like violent music and it puts you off, you know, that's fair enough. I would not suggest this album to you because it is the epitome of that. It's an extremely violent album, but there are moments of genuine nuance and genuine heart and emotion in here. Particularly the final song, Thrill. Amazing song, amazing way to close out an album as well. Yeah, if you like drill in any way, I suggest listening to this album. The last album I want to talk about, I don't know how many is that, 11 or 12? I don't know. I don't want to make this video too long, so that's why. Is 070 Shake's newest album, You Can't Kill Me. I think, overall, she has improved on every aspect of the previous album on this new one. I love the fact that she's confident enough to have, you know, a full-length album and effectively be the only performer and star of the show. The only feature on this is Christine and the Queens, one of my favorite pop artists in the world. I love that song Body. The production from Mike Dean and Johan Lennox is amazing. These songs are fluid, organic. They go in places you don't expect at all. I just think 070 Shake has one of the most unique ears and voices and sounds in... you can't even really categorize her in a genre, to be honest, because I wouldn't classify this as R&B. I wouldn't classify it as pop or soul or hip hop. I like that it's its own little alternative thing, and she's already carving out a distinct sound for herself. But yeah, those are some of my highlights of the first half of 2022. There are many, many more I would love to talk about, but I don't want to make this video too long. My voice is fucked up, as you can tell as well, because I spent... you know, I watched Playboy Carti scream at me for 40 minutes and I was screaming back at him, and it was fucking amazing. But yeah, let me know in the comments down below, what are your favorite projects or albums of the year so far? Make sure to like, subscribe, dong the bell, and I will see you next time.